Some murders are a result of opportunity. Others result from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And still, some are maliciously planned out ahead of time. Unfortunately, many predators pursue careers that put them in a direct contact with victims, providing them with ample opportunities to act out their wicked schemes on the unsuspecting. One such occupation is that of long-haul truck drivers. It turns out there is a dark side to America's highways. And I'm not saying all truck drivers are looking for a target, but across the country, over 850 murders have been linked to long-haul truck drivers in recent decades. And there are a staggering 450 different suspects in those cases. And part of the problem is that with multiple truck drivers, there can be multiple killers up and down our interstates. Frank Fugliuzzi's book, Long Haul: Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, outlines the problem and the efforts that are being made to stop the killings. FBI resources are needed because typically a killer will grab a woman from one state, kill them in another state, and dump the body in a third state. And this creates many obstacles in the investigation between various jurisdictions. Now, city, county, and state law enforcement are working together to connect the dot, hoping to prevent further murders. The FBI has a special database just for serial killings along the highways, and is using new algorithms to track trends such as which long-haul truckers are more likely to kill, which sex-trafficked women are more likely to fall prey to them, and how better crime analysis can help solve these crimes. Stories like today's episode highlight the need for such solutions.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
So before I start this episode, I do have an update for you on the Gretchen Harrington case.
Oh, yes.
So I did that episode, I believe it was last August when I did that one. Well, you know that the man that was arrested for that was David Zandstrom. He was the 84-year-old minister of her church. He finally went to trial.
Okay.
And after a 4-day trial, the jury only deliberated for 1 hour, and he was found not guilty.
What?
He was acquitted Friday, January 17th.
Are you kidding?
Serious as I can be. You know, he confessed. Remember?
Yes.
Well, his attorney said his confession was pressured and coerced, and that he was tricked into it, and there was no actual physical evidence.
Well, yeah, because how many years had it been?
Right. And they said there were other more likely suspects. He had been charged with first, second, and third degree murder and kidnapping. I did read a newspaper account about it. You know, I wondered, usually when the jury comes back that quickly, it's guilty.
Yeah.
So I thought, how could a jury have just been there for 1 hour and found him not guilty?
Right.
Especially after that confession and all of that. I think it just comes down to his defense attorneys were able to just really cast some doubt on the prosecution's methods of getting that confession. And there was some evidence that they were able to refute. Just like you were talking about last week on your episode, we don't want people to be serving time for something they didn't do.
Right.
And we don't want people out who did do something.
Exactly.
So it's hard because, again, if you're not sitting on the jury, hearing what evidence is presented, it's easy to sit here and think, oh, he did it and he should be in behind bars, which I personally do think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I was on that jury, I would have to have agreed with them.
Right.
So it's, it's one of those things.
And sometimes it's technicalities in the law.
Right. And we do have a justice system for a reason.
Right.
I know that in Proverbs 17:5, it says that God detests both acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent. Mm-hmm. And so I guess it's better to err on the side of caution. Anyway, so yeah, he was found not guilty.
I'm kind of disappointed to hear that, but here's what I know too. He lived how many years after the murder?
50.
For 50 years, he is very close to meeting the ultimate judge. And so if he is guilty, he will, he will face
judgment.
He'll face judgment, yeah. And it'll be much harsher than anything, doled out here on earth. So,
Yep, absolutely.
unless he's repented, which, gosh, that's hard. That's so hard
Well,
when you get into that theology.
Well, here's my
because-
take on that.
Okay.
If he's guilty and he still fought this like this, I don't think he's repentant.
Right.
Because if you're
There
not
you
going
go.
to take your consequences and you're
Yeah.
going to sit in there and lie and say your confession was coerced,
Yes.
then you're not repentant, I don't think. So
There you go. That is true.
if he's guilty, he's going to pay for that. If not, then good,
Yeah.
good that he got off when he did.
That's right. Yep.
So there's the update for that.
Well, thank you for the update. I've been waiting to hear
Yeah.
about that case, but it's not what I was expecting at all.
Me either. I was shocked when I read it. Okay, so I'm going to give a trigger warning for this episode.
Okay.
It does contain some explicit details and it does have to deal with a serial killer.
Okay.
So, with that said, if you're sensitive to those things, just be aware. In the early morning hours of January 23rd, 1995, police received a call from a really rattled newspaper carrier. She had been out early morning hours when it was still dark, delivering her papers, and she was calling to report what she thought was a body in the road. It was right off of exit 10 from Interstate 81, which it was southwest of Roanoke, Virginia. And she even told him on the phone, she's like, maybe it's just a mannequin, but I'm not going to stick around to find out.
Yeah.
Detective Kenneth Wilson was jarred from his sleep with a phone call and headed out to investigate. Of course, he arrived on the scene to find that it definitely was not a mannequin.
It's never a mannequin.
Never a mannequin. But the partially nude body of a middle-aged woman who had been strangled and dumped on the road. Her right leg had been run over, and the tire marks that kind of left a blood trail were clearly from like an 18-wheeler.
Okay.
Detective Ross Sheets soon arrived to help his partner, Detective Wilson, and he had recently watched an episode on Unsolved Mysteries about an unknown trucker who had been strangling prostitutes across the Midwest and leaving their bodies on the road. He noticed this crime scene kind of matched the hallmarks of those other cases. The woman's shoes and panties were both missing, and her body had been dumped on that interstate, and he wondered, could this be the work of the same guy? Their suspect in the Midwest cases was thought to be driving a black Peterbilt truck
Okay.
and went by the CB handle Stargazer. The victim's white pants were crumpled up nearby, and wedged between her pants and her face was a plastic Winn-Dixie grocery bag. Both items would play a big part in identifying her and finding the killer.
Okay.
So this investigation about this murder began a 3-month search for the killer that actually ended on April 13th, 1995, when they made an arrest in the case. And it wasn't the suspect in the Midwest cases at all. It was someone who had not even been on their radar. First, the woman they had found had to be identified. So those white pants that she had on had a piece of paper in the pocket. And there was a phone number for a cab station in Gainesville, Florida. Using that phone number, they were able to trace back her movements, and they identified her as 45-year-old Brenda K. Hagee, a drifter from Bloomington, Indiana. She had an arrest record for trespassing at various truck stops. And police officers say the trespassing charge is an easy way to get rid of prostitution going on at the
Yeah.
truck stops.
Yeah.
Which, just even last week in your episode, you talked about that one lady who
Yeah.
gone to the truck stops.
Yeah. That was a thing for
Yes.
sure. Probably still is.
Now they needed to find some evidence that's going to help them find the killer. It was a long shot, but they sent that Winn-Dixie bag off for fingerprint analysis to a crime laboratory in Roanoke, Virginia. They hoped they may could get a print, and they thought, well, if we get a print, it's probably going to belong to the victim, possibly a grocery store clerk. But they thought, it's still worth a shot. We'll try it. And while they were waiting for those results to come back, the detectives, they were also manually tracking down other clues. they were suspected it had to do with those Midwest murders. They thought, well, we might have a serial killer on our hands. And they were determined, let's just get that word put out to other agencies. And within a week of spreading the news, they had over 100 calls from police departments around the country who were also investigating highway murders.
Wow.
And then their hopes rose a little bit when they got word that they did get a print off of that bag. And it did look like it belonged to a man.
Oh, wow.
The print, they ran it through AFIS, which is the Automated Fingerprint Identification System.
Mm-hmm.
And that searches through databases of, at that time, 30 states across the U.S. Unfortunately, they were disappointed when that print did not turn up any matches in that system.
Okay. I'm kind of glad that whoever this is wasn't found guilty or whatever based on that, because, you know, I've been hearing a lot lately about fingerprints being kind of junk science. Yeah.
It's a scary thought.
It is, because
even that.
how many people have been convicted on, you know, fingerprint evidence.
Well, actually, they did send that fingerprint. Since it didn't match that, they sent it to the FBI to run through their database.
Uh-huh.
And that one searches prints of military personnel or anybody that's facing a federal charge, or if they had been arrested in states that didn't use AFIS.
Oh.
And it was still like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Sure.
A lot of detective work is,
Oh,
you know,
definitely.
time consuming and painstaking. I mean, and you think this was 1995. Do you remember how slow computer processing was then?
Yes, I do.
And dial-up internet.
Right.
So it was much slower, and much of that work was being done, you know, manually. So the FBI did say this could actually take months and months.
Yeah.
And it was while they were doing all the meticulous work that 2 other bodies turned up on the roadways along that same highway system in Tennessee and North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
The first one that turned up after the original one was the body of Sherry Manser. She also went by Sherry 2. She was age 34, and they found her on February 19th near I-40 in Guilford County, North Carolina.
Oh, wow. Close to home.
Yes. At first, authorities had a hard time identifying her body, and she was known as Jane Doe for a few months.
Now, were these women murdered the same way?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll give you some more details about these bodies as well.
Okay.
So Sherry, a native of Clearwater, Florida, had a history of prostitution arrest, and her body was actually found wrapped in a blanket. She did have heavy traces of cocaine in her blood, but an autopsy revealed that she had been smothered. So a month later, on March 19th, the partially clothed, smothered, and abused body of Rebecca Alice Haynes was found off of I-81 in Kingsport, Tennessee. Like Hagee, she had a record of trespassing at the truck stops.
Yeah.
And she had been run over after her body was dumped out, too.
Gosh.
Detectives felt it was very likely that these murders were connected, and they really wanted to find the predator before he had a chance to kill again.
Right.
They interviewed family members of the victims. They spoke to countless truck drivers, but they just couldn't uncover anything. And then finally they got a break, which they attributed to luck, but that break in the case did come. On April 7th, Detective Sheets called the FBI once again just to check in and say, hey, found any matches yet? Has anything come up in your system? And of course, discouraged to be told, no, nothing's been found, and this could take up to a year.
Yeah.
But just 45 minutes later, the FBI agent called him back, and he told him, we have a match.
Oh, wow.
The thumbprint that they had found belonged to a man named Sean Patrick Goble, a 28-year-old long-distance hauler who worked for Rocky Road Express out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Oh, my gosh.
He lived right here in Ashburn, North Carolina.
That is like when he was arrested?
Yes.
Wow.
Now, he was arrested at work, but he lived in Ashburn. Actually, he lived a mile and a half from where I lived at that time.
Are you serious?
Yep.
That's a scary thought.
Very. I mean, I have a lot of ties to this one. So he had been arrested the previous September down in West Memphis, Arkansas, for reckless driving, resisting arrest, and creating a public disturbance with a prostitute. And so that's why they had his prints. And it just so happened that Goble also drove a black Peterbilt truck, which some witnesses had seen in the area where Brenda Hagee's body had been found. And it had the Wild One emblazoned across the cab.
Oh, gosh.
So this was a really huge break in the case for the detectives, and they did not want to mess this up. They were very cautious about what their next steps were. So his name is spelled Sean, which I say Sean. I say Sean. But newspaper reports said that he pronounced his name as Scene.
Huh?
His employer said he called himself Scene. One said he's pronounced it Sane.
That's weird.
That is weird. I don't know if that's just something he came up with on his own.
Yes,
it sounds like it
is.
because, Sean, that's Sean.
What a weirdo.
So I'm not going to call him Scene. I'm calling him Sean. Because they were being really careful. They go to his workplace in Winston. And I'm talking, this was investigators from 3 states.
Yeah.
And the FBI. And they come up with this plan. And they go to his workplace on April the 12th, and they kind of feel out the employer, like if he's going to cooperate or not.
Right.
They make a little small talk, and then they drop the bombshell on him. And they say, okay, this is what we're investigating. You can either cooperate and show us your employee files, or we'll just go get the warrant and come back, and you'll still have to give us your files.
Right.
And officials were like, no, we don't want anything to do with that. They chose to cooperate real quick.
Sure.
Kurt Stonestreet, which was Goble's dispatcher. I mean, he couldn't believe it. Right? He told him, he's like, no, this guy, he's like a solid employee.
Can you imagine how shocking that would be?
I'm sure he was floored.
Yeah.
I mean, he told him, he said, this is somebody, he's such a good employee. He said, I would take 10 of him.
Wow.
He said, he's a take charge kind of guy. He's smart. He's friendly. He's not the kind of person that's going to call me in the middle of the night with a problem. If he's got a problem, he's going to fix it and do his job. So employee records showed that Goble had been with the company for about 14 months and searched his travel logs, which placed Goble in the vicinity of each killing they had discovered. That's very similar to what you said about last week, too.
Yes.
When they went to look at his employee time card. His employer told him that, okay, well, he's actually expected back from a run tonight at midnight. So they hunkered down, ready to wait for him. At around 9 p.m., Goble called into dispatch and said, I may be a few days late. I've got an opportunity to deliver some pine bark mulch. He was told, well, just forget about that and come on back. Midnight came and went. No Goble showed up.
Oh, my goodness.
For hours, the detectives waited, hoping for his return, praying he hadn't been tipped off.
Yeah.
And worse yet, really hoping that delay was not really him going to kill someone else.
Sure.
But at 8 a.m. the next morning, Goble pulled in his black Peterbilt truck. The 6'3", 310-pound trucker
Oh, my gosh.
walked into the dispatch office and was promptly arrested. Goble did not resist arrest. They did say his massive size made it impossible to get cuffs on him. Detective Wilson remembered that Goble's wrists were so big, they had to link a few pairs of a few pairs of handcuffs together just to get him cuffed.
Wow. That's one I've never heard before.
I know. He said it was something like, he's like, that man's wrists were as big around as my legs.
Wow.
And he told him that the reason he was late coming in was due to the fact that he had stopped at the Pilot Flying J truck stop in Graham to grab a bite to eat and catch some Z's. Sometimes that truck stop food is so good.
Yes.
That particular truck stop in Graham actually has a Denny's inside of it.
Oh, wow.
Truckers, they really like to have a good breakfast, bacon and eggs and grits and gravy. So I will choose one of the trucker meals to put in our Facebook group.
All right. Looking forward to it.
So after Goble had his food and he slept, he came on back. After he was arrested, he was taken to the police station in Winston-Salem, where he was questioned. And at first, he was very calm and denied any involvement in Brenda Hagee's death. But Detective Wilson, he was not calm. He was impatiently demanding, why is your fingerprint on that bag?
Right.
Suddenly, Goble just started confessing. At times during this interrogation, he bragged about his size and how he had a way with the ladies.
Oh my gosh.
One investigator said he viewed himself as a lady killer in both senses of the word.
Ew.
So here's what Sean Goble told them. Because, of course, he's a victim.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't his fault. It was the women's fault, right?
Sure.
So his version of events was that he was just trying to help Peggy by giving her a ride. And she had solicited him for sex, but he had refused.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah. And he had then stopped at a truck stop in Tennessee for some sleep. And when he woke up, Hagee was partially undressed and on top of him, demanding sex.
Oh my God. That makes me sick.
Yeah.
What an idiot.
I mean, really.
Poor guy picks up a prostitute and then is shocked when she offers sex.
Yeah. Well, he was, just trying to help her out.
Yeah.
He said when he was trying to get her off of him, and he grabbed her by the neck, and before he knew it, she was just kind of limp.
Just gone.
And he knew something was wrong, but, it was too late. And she was bleeding heavily from her nose, and he didn't want the blood to get in his truck, and so that's why he put the bag over her head.
Huh.
And you know how long it takes for people to be strangled. So this is not something that could have happened quickly.
Absolutely not.
Well, while that interrogation was going on, some of the officers had stayed behind to get a search warrant for the truck. So they retrieved it, and when they started searching it, inside they found the pocketbook of Rebecca Haynes, who's the body that they had found in Tennessee.
Had they already put that together or not yet?
Yes, because they had found her body. They found those two other bodies while they were researching the first one.
Okay.
And so they were already suspicious. And they started asking him about it. And during that time, he admitted to that murder too.
Wow.
And then shortly after that is when he had also admitted to killing Sherry Manser in North Carolina. Okay. So he admitted to 3. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Brenda Hagee, and he was placed in the Forsyth County Jail with no bond. He's being charged with hers because he's in North Carolina, but these other 2 jurisdictions have to still.
Oh yeah.
Again, it's in different areas,
right?
So headlines in the Winston-Salem Journal the next day read, "Trucker admits slaying." And then there was another story that said, "Neighbors, arrest is the talk of trailer park."
Yeah, I bet. So did he live in a trailer park?
Yes.
Okay.
Right on Foxfire Road, right down 64 in Asheboro.
Oh my gosh.
Once the arrest was made, the media, of course, made their way down to the trailer park where he resided. And I already told you, it was just a mile and a half from where I was living at the time. I used to run that road up to there. And so when you hear of people being picked up, it's scary. My sister actually used to live in that trailer park.
Really?
Now, not when he was there, probably a few years before that. And my other sister's best friend lived there. So I knew a lot of people, and I know a couple other people that have lived there, and I actually got to speak to one about this.
Wow.
She didn't want her name mentioned because it's still a little scary.
Sure.
So that's understandable. But she did confirm what the paper had printed all those years ago about, the neighbors thinking and all that.
Yeah.
And one of her quotes back then was, "You can't judge a person on their appearance, but he was a weird-looking and acting man." When they heard the news of his arrest and what he had been arrested for, they were freaking out a little bit. But they did give some interviews to the paper. One of them talked about how Sean, he had kept mostly to himself, quiet. That kind of fits that, profile. They said sometimes, occasionally, he would make a small talk. Just the weekend before, he had borrowed a tool or something from one of them and had brought it back and, talked a little bit, but he was just pretty much kept to himself.
Right.
He did hang out with his ex-wife, though, and her new husband. She came on weekends when he was not on the road, and they would all hang out together. Yeah, for whatever that's worth. Of course, hindsight's 20/20. So now that they're hearing these charges, they're also realizing some other stuff. One of them had a 14-year-old daughter, And they did say that she and her friends had been out playing outside, and they noticed him watching them from inside the trailer.
Oh, gosh.
That's freaky.
That is.
And can you imagine, just think about finding out your neighbor is a suspected serial killer and realizing, well, there's been times I've left my teenager at home alone.
Yes.
Literally steps from his trailer and his window and their window.
And they're literal predators. Like, they watch for
stuff like that. And they get braver.
Yeah.
If they do it and they don't get caught, it kind of makes them bolder to try again next time. I can only imagine how that would make you feel. I would be freaking.
Sick to your stomach, yeah.
Yes. But just as there were neighbors who now judged their interactions with him in a new light, there were also others who came to his defense. You know, you can always find some people that'll come out and say, he would never hurt a fly.
He was so good.
So good.
So friendliest guy ever.
Yeah. So there was a pair of sisters that lived not far from there. They didn't live in the trailer park, but they were close by. And both of them came out in defense of him. Lisa Hill and Wanda Moore both lived near Sean at the time. And one of them said, you know, whenever he was off the road, he would come and park his big rig right out in front of her house. This was what Lisa said. And she's a single mother of 3 at the time.
Heck no.
And she's like, he was gentle. She said he didn't mistreat anybody. And she said sometimes if I was upset, he would just be there for me and hold me.
Oh, heck no. And those hands had strangled.
Yeah.
Nope.
Her sister readily agreed with her, telling how if he's upset about something, sometimes he'd call her, describing him like the big teddy bear. And at times he actually gave both of those women gifts like jewelry and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Just what you're thinking. Officers started suspecting maybe some of that belonged to some of their victims. And so they quickly confiscated some of that. I don't know.
That is eerie.
Investigators did seize from his trailer several items of interest, such as pornographic magazines, women's panties, some women's jewelry, and several travel bags. And then they began investigating similar cases in surrounding areas and states. Sheriff Joe Mitchell of Washington County, Virginia, said, this might just be the edge of the spider web that caught a fly. Actually,
yeah, because he had access to so many women in so many states.
Exactly. Easy access. And a lot of those cases were similar.
Right.
Some of the cases that were being more closely scrutinized now were those of Kay Stamey Cobb, age 29, whose body was found along Interstate 77 in Surrey County in 1992. That's up near the border with Virginia. Margaret Sue Goins, who was killed in 1991 and left along I-81. Those 2 women, along with the 2 he had admitted to, had all been known to hang out at the truck stops and turn tricks. So, and 2 of them actually had prostitution convictions. According to the Winston-Salem Journal, in some of the cases, the women's clothing had been strewn along the highway for several miles where their bodies had been deposited. And then he had some minor infractions. He had been convicted in Cumberland County for drug possession and paraphernalia charges, and had traffic charges in Randolph and Davidson counties in North Carolina. The drug possession charge will bring up a point later on.
Okay.
He had admitted to killing 3, Hagee, Haynes, and Sherry Manser in North Carolina. And at first, in court, he said he wanted to represent himself.
Oh, of course he did.
But he was assigned 2 defense lawyers, and then as soon as they got on his case, those confessions immediately dried up.
Yeah.
And any other murders they presented him with, like, what about this one? What about that one? He denied.
Mom's the word.
Nope, exactly. The public defenders asserted that they had been kept from their client, and the authorities said no, he never asked for representation during the questioning, even while admitting to the crimes, and he was told he had a right to one at least 3 separate times and didn't ask.
Okay.
And that was according to a captain at the Guilford County Sheriff's Office. While the judicial wrangling was going on and playing out, the media was discovering more about Sean Goble. He was a native of Rockford, Illinois, where he lived with his mother and sister. Some outlets did report that he was born in Ashboro, but had moved there as a baby.
Okay.
As a boy, he rarely played with the neighbors. He just didn't seem to fit in. He was quiet, But maybe that's because he was keeping secrets.
Mm.
When Sean was a young child, his father, Kenneth Goble, was a former Winnebago County deputy sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
His daddy later was charged with raping a 10-year-old girl.
Oh, my gosh.
And on top of that, 6-year-old Sean was made to wait in the car outside the victim's home during that home invasion and attack.
Whoa.
Isn't that horrible?
That is awful.
When his father was tried for that crime, he tried to claim he was being framed in revenge because he had some testimony that he was going to give before the grand jury that was investigating misconduct in the sheriff's department. Said, he was cooperating in his testimony, and so he got framed. But not only was that claim unsubstantiated, but after he was convicted of the crime, he only served 4 years for raping a 10-year-old girl.
That's horrible.
And was released, where he moved to New Mexico and once again was charged with raping another young girl.
Oh, my goodness.
And she was only 6 years old.
I'm sorry. Sometimes I just feel like death is too good for some people.
Yes, you nailed that. You're exactly right. So this time he pled guilty to the charge in 86. He served time and was released again sometime in 1994.
At what age? Like, how long did he serve?
I don't know. I didn't do the math on that.
Okay, that's terrible.
But he was released in 94.
Not long.
Not long.
That's sick.
And young Sean never uttered a peep about why his father was in prison to any of his schoolmates or friends, but he was fully aware of his father's sexual crimes. Years later, he would say he thought his dad was framed and he didn't think he was guilty, but I don't believe that because, again, he was not once but twice charged with this, and I think it was just a ploy to get that off of his back or whatever.
Yeah. Do you know who he reminds me of? And I don't know why. The Nashville Killer.
Oh.
He just puts me in
the one you did.
The mind of him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've never seen him. I don't know what it looks like, but just
I'll show you a picture.
Okay.
When you see it, you won't think that.
Okay.
But oh gosh, with that kind of a background, it's no wonder she created this monster.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in the car when his dad did this, and he was a kid.
And no telling what he saw. Like if his dad would do that to... what was going on at home?
Exactly. What was he seeing? Yeah. And I feel sorry for 6-year-old Sean.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't feel sorry for 28-year-old Sean because he made his own choices to follow that behavior. So did his dad's behavior create some kind of a monster? Probably.
Yeah.
But, oh, yeah.
I saw a movie one time about, there was this serial killer, this sadistic, evil serial killer who's killing women. And he had the opportunity to go back in time and to kill that child.
Oh.
And it really,
So you got the fictional movie that really makes you think, what would I do?
Yes. Like, what would you do because what
would you do?
But this kid was horrifically abused. This kid was, and there are no excuses, but there are reasons sometimes why people turn out the way that they do.
That's a good way to put it. No excuses, but there are reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me think of a quote I just read the other day that's actually it's a lyric from Morgan Wallen's new song. It's a new song, so I don't know the lyrics really well, but it's like, maybe I'm the problem, but you're the reason.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So after all of that, his mom left his dad. And he's living with his mom and sister and just kind of growing up quiet, not fitting in, probably holding a lot of stuff in. Who knows what's going on in his brain. He grew up, he attended Auburn High School until 1984, where he was a member of ROTC, but then he dropped out of school in his senior year. And he, after high school, had a son with classmate Bonnie Lincoln, and he married her about a year later, joined the Army. But within 2 years, the couple was divorced, and for some reason, he had been dishonorably discharged from the Army. I don't know
why. Okay.
I do not know why. Eventually, he married again in 1988 and moved to North Carolina. That marriage also failed. But I met a woman named Audrey Four, and he had a relationship with her for a while. It's unclear whether those two were ever married. I was not able to determine if she was the ex-wife that he was hanging out with at the trailer or if she was a third relationship after that.
Okay.
He started going to school in Kernersville to be a long-haul truck driver.
Mm-hmm.
After he completed that, he took his first trucking job at DRD Trucking in Denton. And during that time, he lived temporarily with another woman.
So he's hopping around. He's got woman issues.
Definitely. But he loved his grandma.
Really?
Yeah. And at one time, I think he said the two ladies that were sisters that were kind of taken up for him in Ashboro.
Yeah.
I believe it was one of them that said after it was all happened or whatever, he said, if I had just stayed home and took care of my grandma, it all would have been okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably would have.
So during this investigation, the former employer from his first trucking job, that DRD, his name was David Drum.
Okay.
Now, he painted a completely different picture of this Sean Goble. He says he's a complete wimp. He said Sean bragged about himself, but it just kind of rang hollow and didn't really seem true. Like he's just blowing out a lot of hot air. He said Goble's the kind of man you laugh at and blow off.
Oh, wow.
He told of how some employees who had cleaned the trucks had one time found women's clothing in his truck. And then a second cleaning turned up women's underwear and shoes. He said his kids were running around, this owner's kids, were running around with the underwear on a stick saying, "Look what we found in Sean's truck."
Oh, my gosh.
Now, how creepy is that?
That's sick.
Drum just had a hard time believing Goble would be capable of violence. He said, in fact, he felt like Goble was easily intimidated, and he said, I once had cowed him with an idle threat. Like, he wasn't nothing.
Right.
Even though he was 6'3" and 310 pounds. Well,
But some men are big and bad with women.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because then there was the former ex-girlfriend. Her name was Juanita Campbell.
Okay.
She said, well, he did have a quick temper, but she wasn't scared of him. In fact, she said, no, I'm the one that beat him up. They got into an argument over a long-distance phone bill. She was mad at him, and then she took the money for the bill, and then he
Right.
said that she stole from him, and they got in a big kind of fight about it. She said she kicked him, slapped him, shoved him out the door of her trailer where they lived, and she even said she got a butcher knife out and told him she's going to stab him if he came back.
Wow.
She sounds like a classy broad.
Yeah,
doesn't she?
she does. Well, maybe he's like thinking of her when he's killing these
Maybe.
other women.
She said, well, if kicking him out the door is beating him up, then I guess I beat him up then. And in fact, in her, this was not just her blowing off steam. Davidson County records actually show he did press charges against her for that assault that happened in September of 93 and later dropped them on the condition that she stay away from him.
Wow. That is crazy.
That's bizarre, isn't it? Now, during the struggle, he grabbed her by the neck, but she managed to maneuver away and get control and grab that knife.
Probably these other poor women were so high or intoxicated that they couldn't. They
Right.
were literally defenseless.
There was a drug issue.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Many people thought it was a laughing matter that this Juanita said she beat him up because at the time she was only about 110 pounds.
Wow.
But they said Sean did not find it funny. He already had a low self-esteem, hence the bragging.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably humiliating knowing
yeah,
that
I'm
went to court. So sometime after that, he moved to the trailer park in Ashboro. And that's when he started working for the trucking company in Winston-Salem before he was arrested for murder. So in December of 1995, Goble's case finally came before the court. He pled guilty to 2 charges of first-degree murder in the killings of Alice Rebecca Haynes and Brenda Hagee. His pattern was picking up the prostitutes, having sex with them, and then when they made him angry or set him off, he'd fly off the handle and strangle them. This is rough. In Rebecca's case, he put her head between his legs and squeezed until she was no longer breathing.
Oh my gosh.
How horrible that must have been. And then with Brenda Hagee, he strangled her with such force that it broke a bone in her neck.
That's so sad.
Tragic. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms for those murders. Then in 1996, he faced charges for that murder of Sherry Mansour in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first-degree murder case against her was weak because she had so much of that cocaine in her system that her death couldn't be proven to have not been caused by that.
I gotcha.
So they
Okay.
just dropped it down to second-degree murder. He pled guilty to second-degree murder in her case. But the events that led up to her death was the same pattern as before. He picked her up. He had sex with her. And this time when he smelled her cooking up drugs in his truck, that set him off. And he said he didn't do drugs. And so that made him mad. And so he attacked her. Because he told her, get rid of that stuff because she was cooking something.
Yeah.
And then he said the next thing he knew, she was dead also. Now,
I'm sure the next thing he knew.
exactly. And also keep in mind, he said he didn't do drugs, but obviously he did have a prior drug charge. Now,
Right.
maybe he wasn't doing drugs now. Maybe.
Or maybe he's just a pathological liar.
Yeah. But he did receive another 14 years tacked on the 2 life sentences to be served consecutively. And so that left him facing like 72, 74 years in prison before he would ever be eligible for parole. And he was 29 by then. Those were effectively life sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1997, after already put in prison for those, he was indicted in the death of another woman,
Oh, wow.
Lisa Susan O'Rourke. So remember I told you they were looking at him for others, and,
Yes.
and they didn't prove that he did those, and he wouldn't admit to any of those. But they had enough evidence to indict him for the death of Lisa Susan O'Rourke. In 1994, he picked her up along I-10 in Mississippi, had sex with her and strangled her, and then dumped her body under a bridge in Alabama. And originally her death was ruled as hypothermia,
Wow.
but later they traced it back to Goble, and it was deemed a homicide. Investigators decided not to even prosecute any further because the money it cost to go through all
Yeah.
of that, since he had the 2 life sentences that he was serving plus the extra 14 years, they said the likelihood of him being released on parole was not.
He's not going to be released.
So they said, they didn't want to just waste any more money on that. And then some of those victims that he had been suspected of
Mhm.
killing, unfortunately, later they were determined to have been killed by yet another long-haul trucker serial killer
Gosh.
during that same time period. As of today, Sean Goble is still detained in the state of Tennessee and fulfilling those sentences.
Good. And I hope he stays
Yeah.
there until he dies.
Me too.
Those poor women.
That one did hit very close to home for me.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That it was right here in Asheboro, a serial killer.
Yes.
You literally never know.
You literally never know.
Those were some hard times.
They were.
Now I work in the trucking industry as a mechanic, and I've met 1,001 truck drivers that would in no way, shape, or form ever hurt anybody. But I've met more than a couple who I was surprised didn't have a dead body in the back of the truck. But it's a proven scientific fact that nobody has ever been killed by a truck driver while they were listening to Hard Times and True Crimes. So you make sure you keep liking and subscribing and leaving 5-star reviews. And tell everybody you know, even if they're a creepy truck driver, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.